Hi class, this is the last section of Unit 1, the Aegean Greeks, which are kind of basically the archaic Greeks. Some of them are even prehistoric, but it's the Greeks before the Greeks, shall we say, the less famous of the Greeks, although ones that you certainly would know the stories from. So Aegean Greeks are the ones located in and around the Aegean Sea. Which is that central little sea in the area between Greece and Turkey. There are three big Aegean Sea groups that we're going to cover. One is the Mycenaeans, the other is the Minoans, and the third is the Cycladic civilization, although I did them in order. But basically, Greece itself is divided into four big periods. Instead of the three of the Egyptians, the three of prehistory, we have four with the Greeks. The first age, the age that we're covering basically in today's class, is the Helladic age, or the Aegean Greeks. So the 3500 to 1100 BC, 2500 years basically. And we'll talk about the Dark Ages a little bit. But classical Greece is the Greece you're more familiar with, right? The Greek and Persian wars, all of the kind of more famous Greek Pericles, all of the kind of great Greek stories that you probably know come from classical Greece. And then the last group of Greek history is actually Hellenistic civilization, and that's kind of from Alexander the Great on, is called Hellenistic civilization. And we'll kind of cover those later, but that's next unit, so don't worry about classical or Hellenistic for now. So the Aegean Greeks, again, starts around 3500 BC, but the first earliest Greek civilization is actually the Cycladic civilization. There are Greeks that are there before them, but as a full-blown kind of civilization, we have the Cycladic civilization that appear on the Cycladic Islands, hence we give them that name. The second reason we give them that name is because they didn't write. They're prehistoric. They're a Neolithic culture, a farming culture. They had no writing, however, so we don't know what they called themselves. So we just name them after where they're found on the Cycladic Islands. The next one is the Minoan civilization. Starts around the same time. However, they are historic. They do have writing, although it has still yet to be deciphered, translated. We do not know what the Minoans wrote. We just know that they did write. And that writing is called Linear A. It's still never been deciphered, like I said. That's basically the island of Crete, which is off the southern coast of mainland Greece, and tiny little islands nearby. They don't really get that much bigger. And then the third group are the Mycenaeans, which appear on mainland Greece, in the southern part of mainland Greece, kind of today. A lot of farmland. But much more famous for probably anciently, that's kind of where Sparta was, although these are not the Spartans yet, so the Mycenaeans are not the Spartans. Eventually, these cultures clash, of course. The reason the Minoans disappear is basically because of the Mycenaeans. So the Mycenaeans also do write. Their writing is called Linear B because the styles are similar. But the interesting thing is Linear B actually has been deciphered because it's an early form of Greek. We're not sure what the Minoans were speaking. It still hasn't been figured out, like I said. The mythological Trojan War actually is a real event that happened. Of course, the story that you read is myth, but the war itself is real. Happened with the Mycenaeans. Again, they're the ones involved with the Trojans. And then we do have that Dark Age, like I said. The Dorians is another group of Greeks that comes along, invades, wipes out the Mycenaeans, and they begin what's called the Greek Dark Ages. And again, it explains here, Dark Ages has nothing to do with the people were barbarians, the people, ate with their hands, murdered people. They may have done all those things, it's possible. But that's not why we call it a Dark Age. The more famous Dark Age, obviously, is in the Middle Ages. The reason we call it a Dark Age is because there's no written documents in an era that used to have written documents. So the Minoans and the Mycenaeans are writing. All of a sudden, the Dorians come, no writing. And there's a 300-year period where basically there's no writing. And so we consider it a dark age because we, modern people, are in the dark as to what actually was really going on then. I mean, we have architecture, we have tombs, physical artifacts, but we do not have anything of what these people were thinking or doing or etc. because of that. But the Dark Age actually ends with the Iliad and the Odyssey, those two books by Homer, being written down. And once the Greeks adopt the Phoenician alphabet, and once they write them down, writing comes back, becomes cool, becomes popular again, and it ends the Dark Age. So the Cycladic civilization, like I said, is the first, again, named after the islands, the Cycladic Islands, which are called the Cycladic Islands because they cycle around. The birthplace of Apollo and his twin sister Artemis, are born in the center of these cycle islands, the islands that go around them. Again, no written records, Neolithic, they were mostly farmers and fishermen. We don't know much about them at all, except, again, some of the funeral remnants and stuff. We don't even have their homes because they made their homes out of wood. We have like holes in the ground where the homes would have been, but that's about it. The Minoans, on the other hand, we know a lot more about because other cultures wrote about them, right? So the Egyptians wrote about them, the Mycenaeans wrote about them. They wrote about themselves, but we don't know what they wrote because it wasn't translated. But we know what the other cultures wrote about them. Of course, that's going to be biased and come from a place of, my culture is better than yours, so it's always going to kind of be making fun of them. So we know some things about them, but not enough. So the Minoan civilization, obviously, again, didn't call themselves Minoans. We don't know what they called themselves because, again, their writing hasn't been translated. But they're named after King Minos, the famous mythological King Minos, who has the Minotaur and the labyrinth and all that kind of stuff. And basically the reason it gets that name is because the archaeologist who, rediscovered their ruins found the Palace of Knossos, and in the Palace of Knossos is a designed garden like a labyrinth. So he figured, hey, this must be the Minoans, but no chance they're really called the Minoans. They're mostly a seafaring culture, again, fishing, trade, big navy, but no real big army. The center of their culture was at these big palace complexes in the big cities, the biggest, of course, being Knossos, which is where the king lived, therefore, the capital city. Minoans do have their own style of art. Cycladic culture really doesn't because we only have like one kind. And basically in Minoan art, there's a bunch of different characteristics. Again, for the test, you need to know which only two. But they are a very peaceful culture. As far as we know, based upon all the ruins we have, they didn't even build fences or walls around their cities or properties. So they didn't really have this idea of defense even. I guess they thought their navy would be strong enough to hold off any potential enemy. Eventually, of course, someone always has a stronger navy, so they were wrong. So most of their artwork focuses on playfulness, fun, sport, fishing, the things with the water, of course, because they're a maritime culture. So you're going to see a different style in art. So you got the Egyptians with everything with religion, the Sumerians, everything with religion, the Assyrians and Akkadians, everything about their kings and the power and, no spirituality whatsoever. The Minoans have a mix. It's a little bit spiritual, a little bit fun, but very little focus on the kings and focus on power. And I guess it wasn't important to them. Maybe, especially with no walls, maybe they shared. However, they clearly, as you can see here, borrowed from the Egyptians' styles. More colorful than the Egyptians. On the left is the Minoan, on the right is the Egyptian. But same kind of poses, same kind of general style. I mean, the guy is in profile, but his chest is facing forward, just like in Egyptian art. But his legs are still in profile, right? An impossible way to stand in real life, but perfectly normal in Egyptian art. And then, again, we see it in Minoan art. Mycenaean culture is also incorrectly named. The archaeologist who discovered Mycenaean culture discovered the city of Mycenae first. and it's a big city, a big ancient city, and named the culture after that ancient city. Later, they found out that the Mycenaeans were part of a bigger culture with a lot of cities in southern Greece, and were all related to the same group of people called the Achaeans in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. So we know they're the Achaeans now, but they're still generally called the Mycenaeans everywhere. They're much more warlike, much more aggressive. The southern Greeks seem to be the military power, historically. Again, the Spartans would also come from this area as well. The Dorians would also come from this area as well. And so, kind of after those three groups, there are three kind of, I wanted to say invasions, but that's not correct, migrations of other Eastern European people into Greece that will become the Greeks. Those three groups are the Aeolians, the Ionians, and the Dorians. The Aeolians would settle basically in northern Greece today, like kind of Macedonia area. The Ionians in central Greece and in the islands. And then the Dorians in the southern part of Greece. And they're still the same groups of people today. They're Greeks, right? So yes, they're Greek, but they would tell you they're Ionian, or Dorian still, right? Because they're still from that group and that culture. And they are different cultures. The Aeolians in the north are mainly farmers. The Ionians in the middle would be called the snobs, the elite, the philosophers, the professionals. And then the Dorians in the south are kind of the brutes, the barbarianish, strong, military culture. And it's not quite the same anymore, to be honest, but that's kind of, the stereotype of those groups, and still today, it's the stereotype. And these all speak Greek, a form of Greek, not modern Greek, but classical Greek, which would develop into modern Greek, fully understood, all consider themselves Greeks. Okay, so Greek art, the first group of art is Cycladic. Again, there's no characteristics because there's just these kind of artworks. We do not have a lot from them. They all kind of look just like this, kind of like aliens if you want. Back to our ancient alien conspiracy theory stuff, right? They're always women, so the assumption is fertility, right? They're always buried with the dead. There are some that do other things other than this. For example, here's a musician playing a harp. But that's about it. That's all we got from them. The Minoans, on the other hand, like I said, we had their characteristics earlier, but the Minoans have much more art to go around and left us a lot more ruins. Part of the reason is the island of Thera, which was on an earlier slide, had a volcanic eruption. And that volcano, just like the one in Pompeii, covered the whole entire city with ash. And in modern times, they found it, dug it up, and found some really, good archaeological artifacts in really good condition. For example, this is a bedroom. You can't really tell that it's a bedroom. You're going to have to trust me. But if you look on the back wall and the bottom and the back wall to the right, you kind of see a squared out pattern where there's no paint. That's kind of where the headboard would have been for the bed. If you notice above that, there's kind of a shelf where you would have put your clothes or whatever. And then the wall is painted with this really bad painting of what's supposed to be flowers and birds and mountains, right? It's not very good. So a warning to those of you in advance. Remember what your bedroom looks like now, because who knows what can happen 1,000 years from now. They discover your bedroom and they see all those awful Justin Bieber posters. Just wouldn't be good. Did they worship this Bieber guy? I don't know. So here's the Palace of Knossos, the one with the labyrinth. Again, you can kind of see it if you look at the top left part of the thing to the right. You kind of see the labyrinth pattern in the ruins. Obviously, there's not much left of it, but if you look again at this picture and you see some of the areas have roofs on them, if you go visit Knossos, if you're interested in ancient art, ancient history, instead of spending 2 hours walking around this place looking for the 4 or 5 great things you can see here, if you see that there's a roof on the building, that's where you want to go, because that's where this stuff is being protected and preserved. That's where the better artwork's going to be instead of just ruins. It is the first building in the world that we know of that had running plumbing. Here's the pipeline, basically, where the water would go to the sink at the very end at the top in the picture. Right. And this is what it would have looked like, the complex. Obviously a lot different than the ruins that are left. But like I said, there are some rooms. You can see again the labyrinth here in the design of it. To the left is where you see the labyrinth. You can see some of the areas that are covered here, right? So here are some of the covered areas. You can see the paintings, the frescoes, the columns. They're still painted. They're still in good condition, right? The throne room at the bottom here, with the pot in front of the king's throne for a fire to keep him warm, obviously. Again, there are a bunch of different things we don't know about the Minoans. The few things we do know about the Minoans are, for their religion, there was some aspect of their religion that focused on nature, in particular bulls and snakes. And we know that because of the remnants in the ruins, but also because of what other, like the Mycenaeans and the Egyptians, wrote about them, that they had halls dedicated to bulls. So here are the horns of the bull at the top of this little temple that would have been dedicated to some kind of sacrifice of bulls, I guess, or some sacrifice of animals. Here's the snake goddesses. Again, a bunch of little temples they found, and in these temples they found these statues of women holding snakes in various positions, up high, down low, out to the sides, right in front of you. So some kind of cult religion thingy going on with snakes. All the priestesses in this kind of wearing the same costume, right? Topless with this big flaring skirt. And there are hundreds of these statues, so we know that it wasn't something just local. It was something happening all over the Minoans. We also know, here's some evidence, these are almost always made out of ivory. And since ivory doesn't exist on Crete, the closest place they could have got ivory would have been from trading with Egypt. So it's some evidence that the trading was going on between the countries as well. And then we have probably the most famous of the Minoan works of art, the bull leaping fresco, which is, I would say, I guess their masterpiece, for lack of a better word. Fresco is a fancy word for wet plaster, paint on wet plaster. The idea behind what you see in this painting is you're 14, 15 years old. It's a ceremony of proving that you're finally reached adulthood, you finally reached manhood, and then so you jump over the bull. So you grab the bull by the horns. You've probably heard that saying in English before, grab the bull by the horns. It kind of means get up your courage. It's not original meaning, but that's what it means now. So you would grab the bull by the horns. You see the guy on the left doing it, do a backflip over its back, right? And then run like hell, basically. If you succeeded in doing this and not getting killed by the bull, you proved that you were a man and ready to enter into society. We know that this is a dangerous thing because there have been found many damaged 14-year-old boys with their rib cages crushed by bulls. So a lot of them weren't successful at this particular fun ceremony. A close-up of grabbing the bull by the horns. Okay, this is actually the dolphin fresco, which is found inside found inside the queen's bedroom. I think I can go back, maybe. There we go. Found inside the queen's bedroom. You can see sea urchins on the bottom, fish flying around, fish swimming around, dolphins swimming around. Again, bright, colorful marine themes. You can also see that they didn't always keep the same decoration, much like today. There's some remodeling. If you look at the bottom left corner, the top part of the fresco has fallen off, and underneath is an old fresco with a different pattern, right? You can see the orange swirl rather than the blue circles at the bottom. Obviously, it's a pottery with Squidward on it. Again, marine life. So here's, an octopus on a jar. You get a lot of them. You're going to see a lot of that because, again, sea life was important to them. Their lifestyle. So, again, fishermen. Here's that city in Thera. So you can kind of see the Pompeii-like city that got covered by volcano. You can see here in the bottom right picture. You can actually see some vases in perfect condition, like perfectly preserved. Obviously, some of the buildings have collapsed because of the weight of the ash, but you can actually see some of the frames in the windows, even a boxing. And then, of course, the top right which is, believe it or not, a drinking vessel. Like, you would drink out of that now, probably for some ceremony, some ritual kind of thing. Again, being a bull again, right? Once again, back to that religion. The Mycenaeans, on the other hand, have different characteristics, again, whichever two work for you. But again, this is a warrior culture. So most of the stuff is going to be focused on that warrior culture stuff, and showing off, right? Showing off their king, showing off their power, showing off their military in some way, showing off their wealth. So gold, like really for the first time, although the Egyptians use a lot of gold, it's more mystical for the Egyptians. For the Mycenaeans, gold is a show of wealth, showing off that you're powerful, showing off that you're doing well, right? So the Mycenaeans built these big, gigantic cities, walled cities. They did build walls around everything because they were a warrior culture and always afraid of being attacked and attacking, so you needed big defense. These are monstrous, by the way. You can't tell how big this is. I could tell you that from the ground to the top is about 30 feet, and the gate, and then side to side on the gate is probably about 25 feet, so it's huge, monstrous. But all the cities generally have only one way in and one way out, so that if an enemy did attack, you just put a bunch of soldiers on the other side of the gate, and only 10 guys are getting in at a time anyway, so just killing 10 guys at a time instead of fighting a whole army. The reason these big stones have been called Cyclopean is, if you remember, we talked about the Dark Ages, 300 years of nobody writing and reading and knowing what the hell is going on. So when other Greek cultures came after the Mycenaeans were destroyed in 1100 BC, 300 years later, you see these big abandoned cities, and all the Greek myths are starting to be told. And they see these monster 30-foot tall doorways, 20-foot wide doorways with stones that weigh 6,000-7,000 pounds. They didn't think they were built by humans. They assumed they were built by the race of giants that the Greeks believed in, called Cyclops. So they got the nickname, these are Cyclops houses, these are Cyclops cities, and so the stones still today are called Cyclopean stones, even though we no longer believe in Cyclops. In case you were wondering. This is one of those, a tomb, even though it's called a treasury, because in it was found a treasury with lots of gold and lots of things. But it's a tomb. They're beehive tombs. They're shaped like a beehive, kind of. This particular one is believed to be the tomb from the Atreus family, the famous King Agamemnon from Homer's Iliad. Whether or not King Agamemnon is real is up for debate, but it's definitely the Atrian family, based upon the ruins and remains and names that are there. Inside that tomb, you can kind of see how big it is in the right picture. That triangle you saw in the front is at the top of that. You can see how tall that is. Inside the tomb was found several bodies. One had a lot of jewelry and this gold mask covering his face, while his skull at this point. And the assumption was this must be King Agamemnon, but that's an assumption. We still give it that name, the Mask of Agamemnon, but we're not 100% sure it's the Mask of Agamemnon. But if it is, it would be the first artifact from the Trojan War. And these are just some of the other things showing off their power, the big cities, the big city walls, gold to show off we have a ton of money, right? Even their cups are made out of gold. And one on the bottom right is actually would have been covered by columns, and then the center would have been an area of a ritual and ceremony as well. You can kind of see in the bottom left where that circle would have been. And the top left is actually in between the walls, so that the soldiers could move around the city as they were being attacked and come out a different area to kind of, again, good defensive purposes. And that ends this. This part of the same PowerPoint is actually in Unit 2, so don't start it. You can if you want to, but it's not going to be on this test. So that should cover us for this week. Thank you very much.